Hey guys, it's been a while since I introduced a new feature on our app called Ask. This time around, we've created something very special. How about creating a GPT, or what we call profiles, around podcasts, where you can create a chatbot to have a conversation with your favorite podcast by searching for it. So now, this is a demo where I'm going to create a profile. It's just like a GPT. And then I'm going to add a podcast to the GPT or to the profile. As you can see, you can add websites, you can add podcasts, you can add video, you can add images in the future. But let's go ahead and add a podcast. So I'm going to go ahead and search for a podcast right now. And I'm just typing in the search. This week in Google is going to look up that podcast. I'm going to select the podcast. And here are all the episodes. I'm going to select the episode after I browse through it, and I'll be able to play that episode to preview it. Then I'm going to add that episode to the profile. So now it's actually adding the transcription after it creates it of that podcast to a profile. And here's the status: 10%, and it should go to 100% in a few seconds. Alright, so now we've created a transcript of This Week in Google, that episode. So we're going to go ahead and preview it. Here's all the information, the episode show notes, and here's a transcription of the podcast, the entire transcript. And now you can actually have a conversation with this podcast, just like you would with a file that you uploaded on ChatGPT, a PDF. But we've extended it so that you can actually talk to a website. So as you can see, you'll get the summary of a podcast, highlights of a podcast, potential questions you may ask about the podcast, and even topics broken down for the podcast. So I'm going to ask my first question. And remember, this is going against the transcript for the podcast. And I'm going to get an answer right away. So it's actually telling me what the podcast was about. Now I'm asking it to give me all the highlights from this podcast episode. And it's going to refer to your transcript and give me all the highlights. Now let's ask it something a little bit more difficult. What questions can I ask? So it's going to give me some of the questions I can ask about what was covered in the podcast. Now let's ask another question. Who participated in this podcast? So it should be able to give me everyone who is actually participating in this podcast. And those are all of the participants, including the host. Now I'm asking it, what was Leo talking about? And it's telling me everything that one of the hosts, what he was talking about on the podcast. ask another question. What was Jeff Jarvis talking about on the podcast? Now it's going to give me a summary of what Jeff was talking about on the podcast. So that's it. Conversations with Podcasts. Profiles are just like GPTs on ChatGPT Plus, but there's a big difference. You can add multiple items to a profile to have a conversation with it, including podcasts, PDFs, any type of files for the most part, websites, images, and videos, which there will be a demo next. Thank you for your time.